Welcome back to the CloseMode podcast. I'm Dan Sanchez, and I'm back with Brian. In fact, it's good to be back in the host seat, Brian. I've been the producer for the last 13 or 12 or 13 episodes here, just on silent mode. At least in the last episode, you started calling me out, and I started throwing things in the chat. No one can see it, but you were still mentioning it.
But
I probably need to come. I need to bomb more episodes. Is what I need to do.
I failed because yes, I was trying to goad you into breaking in. So next time.
Yeah,
next time.
I thought about it. I'm like, maybe next time. Maybe next time. I don't know if I want to do that as producer yet, but It's fun to be back in the host chair, to be actually involved in the episode, because I'm a podcaster. Gosh dang it, put a mic in front of me. I like to talk too. I especially like to ask good questions, and I'm just hungry. I want to learn. So,
and wait,
but I wanted to start off
before we start. Can I tell you, you look smashing in your red velvet onesie. It looks really good today, I have to say. It's very
got my onesie on today. Did I put my hood on?
Yeah,
since it's a video podcast.
Yes, you look like Devil Smurf. It's good.
Oh man,
sorry.
Every time I come on, I'm gonna be like, "Hey, it's a onesie day, Brian. You know how it is." Today, We're talking about the state of sales enablement, if you saw the title. But before we jump into that, I just want to have a quick pause of celebration, because this is episode 23 of CloseMode, and we just launched beginning of November-ish. And I have to say, I saw a post recently from Alex Hormozy that said most 90% of podcasts don't make it past the first episode. So 90% of them do episode 1, never publish again. And if you make it past episode 21, you're in the 99 percentile of as far as podcast publications go.
It's a low bar, but I'm glad we're there.
We're not dead. But we're going strong. I mean, dang, we've done that's a lot of episodes, and we're doing 8 guest episodes a month. There's our 4 we're doing every month, you and I. So 12 episodes a month is no joke. I mean, it's a pretty rapid pace. I'm usually, as a podcast guy, trying to just convince companies to do one a week, and they're just like, "Oh, can we only do one a month?" So, way to take it by the horns. It's a lot. But
selfishly,
having done so much so fast, I got some questions for you.
Oh, you just fire away. I like being in this other chair now. Yes.
So the cool part about being the producer is I get to hear all these conversations, and I'm there taking notes as these conversations are going by. And I've noticed we've done a lot of shows on sales enablement, hence the title of this podcast today, The State of Sales Enablement.
Yeah.
And I kind of want to do a recap, because so many of them have focused on that, to kind of see what you think of the state of that right now. Starting with, what have you learned after talking to all these guests about it? What are some new things that have popped up for you about sales enablement in general?
Well, it's not a sleep at the switch. I mean, it's change, right? So it's really exciting. I think it's good change directionally. It's relevant change. There's a lot of purpose for people now, and a lot of energy to say, let's move forward into a new thing. And I suppose we'll end up talking about what that new thing is. But overall, that's it. I feel like it's a function in shift in a really cool, good direction. Yep.
It's good. Change is good. So before we jump into what it's changing to, what is it changing from? What was it before that signified that being the big thing that you've noticed?
Well, I sales enablement is one of those things. We've talked about this before. I'm married to a Hawaiian, and I have, in fact, on this arm, a Hawaiian tattoo, who's allegedly a Hawaiian god. And depending on which Hawaiian you ask, it's a different god. And so I think which is pretty typical with my relationship with my Hawaii family. I'll get 5 different answers to the same question. But I think it's similar in sales enablement, where it kind of depends. There's such a wide range of the people who are leading them, where they sit in their organization, what function they're actually providing, right? But I would say that there is, so that being said, a wide range. At the highest levels, there's a lot of people that think about sales enablement as training, right? Oh, so those are the training guys. This is not the training department. Sales enablement, I read 10 different consultant definitions, and the only 3 things that were in common were it's training, it's technology, and it's coaching, and content. So that's the function. So I think and it's also, this is interesting to me, and this might sound pedantic, but the shift from it's been known as sales enablement or enabling sales. And so that would say to you that, okay, the sale is done. We're done. And we're now making this transition to enabling revenue, which means we keep going. And, a moment ago, we talked about there's this massive change happening. It's a subtle name change from sales enablement to revenue enablement. But in my mind, when you flip those words and you go from enabling sales to enabling revenue, you see this whole broader picture of the entire buyer journey rather than just getting the deal.
It's funny. I remember thinking, we talked a lot about sales enablement back in a previous podcast I hosted on B2B marketing. And we talked a lot about sales enablement, but it was always from a marketing perspective, yes, which was like almost always content,
yeah,
nothing to do with training, and some about technology, because that's where marketing overlapped with sales, with sales enablement and those things. So coming in and thinking about training being actually the massive elephant in the room when it comes to sales enablement, I'm like, oh, that's news to me. Didn't know that incorporated it. It's kind of funny though. I'm like, sales enablement is such a broad definition that I'm like, how do you separate sales ops from sales enablement?
Yeah.
Is sales enablement always new things adding on, and sales ops are essentially supporting existing processes? I'm like trying to figure out, I'm like, what? We have all these names floating around, which is, I guess, typical in business. We're just naming things willy-nilly.
Yeah, I think it depends on which Hawaiian cousin of mine you ask. So but we had a gentleman on the other day who's very future thinking about revenue enablement, and I asked him the relationship between RevOps and sales enablement, and he even struggled with that. So that's part of this shift, is figuring out where this function lives, what it does, and getting it more concrete, which I say it's about time. It's been sort of, I feel like if I'm going to be critical of a function that I'm part of in a sort of, I don't know, slightly separated way, but it's been trying to find relevance for 20 years. And so now it's time to get really tight on defining where does it live, how does it interact with sales ops, rev ops, marketing, the IT, everybody.
So now that it's coming under this umbrella of revenue or revenue enablement, how is that opening? How is that changing things? What new components are being added to this function?
Yeah, I mean, it's cross-functional right now. I mean, we talked about marketing, and maybe it touches training and technology, but now we're looking at CX. In fact, the one podcast we did was sales enablement meets CX, right? So it's the entire customer experience, the entire revenue journey, right? So it's cross-functional depending on how the company is set up, but it's involving 5 or 6 more functions. And the thing that's still not clear to me is, do reporting structures change? Is this formal? Or is this more, dotted line influence based stuff? And I think that's what's got to happen from here is some better best practice models for how are people compensated? How is this thing funded? How do reporting structures work? All of that's in flux. And I think the Revenue Enablement Society is, by the very nature of making their shift from sales enablement to revenue enablement, they're doing what they should do, which is taking the lead. Somebody in the industry has got to take the lead and begin to set that true north. And Dan, you and I have talked about before that I was part of one of the first national account organizations. And some people listening might remember there was just sales. And when national or global or strategic accounts came out, a lot of executives were like, what the hell do those guys do? What is that? Why should I fund it? What's my ROI? And Strategic Account Management Association led the charge on bringing together the best and brightest and put together decks and talking points and org structures and comp structures and ROI calculators to bring back up to the executives. And I do feel like this industry has got to go from it depends. What is the definition of revenue enablement? Who do you report to a little bit more consistent one of recommendations to say this is what we know to be the best functioning model.
I do find that it's like tremendously important. If you're going to lead in a new direction, you need to be clear on your definitions, and you need to have a very clear goal.
Yes.
And a clear, essentially a mission and a problem that you're coming from.
Yeah.
This is why we're doing it. Here's the problem. Here's where we're going. Here's why.
Yep.
If you don't have those things in place with clear definitions, then people might get all excited because it can mean a little bit of everything to everybody, but it's hard to know if it's ever going to it's actually going to make the progress that you're hoping for.
Exactly. And that's kind of what I was opening with, that it's an exciting time. It's good change. Like there's a lot of energy. I think the very shift of a word from sales to revenue is one of those big shifts, maybe a Malcolm Gladwell tipping point thing where like that made sense to everybody. But what you were just saying, I feel like it's that next level down of operationalizing this thing. And then 3 levels below that again of, reporting structures and success metrics and, different models for different kinds of organizations. But I feel like that's the next level down to move this more quickly, because we don't want to go another 20 years. We have this moment in time right now where I think we caught the ears of some executives with this shift, and now we just have to execute.
Well, I like the change. I think just changing the name brings more clarity to it, because before it was confusing. I will say, like, lots of things are changing. What's staying the same? What hasn't changed that doesn't need to change?
Yeah, it's the maybe integration or rationalization. There's I feel like it's sales enablement's role to rationalize a lot of the stuff coming at sales. You've got marketing, you've got product, you've got pricing, you've got decks, tools, training, and even with training, sometimes you've got 3 vendors that cover the entire sales cycle. Well, here's your discovery person, here's your value selling person, here's your negotiating person, and there's so much. And I feel like what's staying the same is that's got to be rationalized and kind of rethought. I think I read recently that the average sales rep has 10 tech tools. So is that 8 too many? I don't know, but I do think that's the part that figuring out. And one of our guests who leads global sales enablement said, it's my job to figure out where the holes are and focus in on that. And I like that. And part of that to me is the operational holes of this rationalization of everything that's coming in. But the other part is, where are we struggling? Let's look at the entire buyer's journey, and let's see where we're struggling and be proactive and do that diagnostic of, here's 2 or 3 spaces. And then let's not just go back to the legacy way to get that fixed, throwing training at it or something, but let's figure out where are those gaps and what might be a new, unique, emerging way to execute and fill that gap, but much more proactive than reactive.
Yep. Man, I actually have some experience doing sales enablement, and I didn't even realize it at the time. I was a marketing director for a small college, and my best friend was over the sales, the admissions department is what they call it over in higher ed, right? It's actually similar to B2B sales, because you're talking about this long, complex process. There's multiple stakeholders, parents, and all this kind of stuff. So it kind of mirrors B2B sales nicely, because again, it takes usually like 6 months to go through the whole cycle with one person. And I ran all the tech. I set up all the technology. I did all the enablement, all the resources they need. The one thing I didn't do is the training, but it was like the biggest part that was like the most painful to me as the marketing guy. I'm like, I'm sending you leads and I'm listening to your calls and they freaking suck. And I go to my best friend in charge of sales. I'm like, dude, you got to do more coaching. And it was never enough to do the one-time coaching. And that's a whole nother episode we're going to be doing, recording soon. But like, really, it was just ongoing coaching of like side-by-sides and coaching, side-by-side coaching, side-by-side coaching of like helping them understand where they missed it, why they missed it, and how to do better.
And now we get to go further in the revenue chain and start looking at CX and saying, okay, like what the heck's going on there, and what can we help and what is our role there? So it's getting more complicated again, directionally, exactly the right thing to do.
So with that being said, what do you see coming next for sales enablement, now revenue enablement?
I think to a degree, Dan, we've covered it, which I think the North Star is pointed in the right direction. It's the execution arm now. It's it's the industry aligning on some standards. Again, I know I often mention this national account thing, but anybody who was part of it knows that thing made a big leap because the industry standardized somewhat on a few different models for how things worked. And so I do think the next thing is reducing that variance and coming up with 2 or 3 models for 2 or 3 different kinds of types of organizations or industries. Beginning to, we clearly know what accounting does. We know what marketing does, right? But we don't.
The marketers debate that
That's
all
true.
day.
That is true. Good point. Good point. But yeah, I mean, we a lot of other functions are clearer than this one because my original answer to you was it depends. What organization are you in? How do they define it? That kind of thing. So bringing some structure, some best practice, people sharing across companies, probably with non-competitive types, but and that's what I saw happen in the national global account arena, where practitioners began really sharing with one another and developing models and executing against those models, and most of all, communicating to executives against those models. And there is one thing that I feel really strongly about. I think that what's next is revenue enablement is the execution arm strategy for senior leadership. So the answer to what is revenue enablement, there might be an org chart or something. But if you were my CEO, I would say, well, Dan, what are your goals in 2024? Goals that can be executed by sales or customer service. What are your goals? That's what my job is for next year. And the thing that we know from some early primary research we did is that executives will jump on to initiatives when it's seen as the execution arm of what's important to them.
Yeah.
So yeah. I believe there's a certain that's where you're going to get buy off. That's where you're going to get funding. And that's and in a lot of the interviews I've done, I didn't hear a lot about my role in sales or revenue enablement is to connect the strategy of the leaders one deal at a time to the tactics of the sellers or the tactics of the service people or even the marketers. And I believe that's if there's something that goes below revenue enablement, if that's the North Star, it's to me the next line down is we're strategy execution.
Yeah, man, that reminds me of like one critical book. Hold on, I have to find it on my shelf and bring it forward. If it's
I thought that was a fake bookshelf, like a backdrop.
Nope, no, they're all real. Right. I've actually read them all, but I can't find it on my shelf. Oh, that's frustrating.
It'll come to you.
No, there it is. There it is. It's a fat one by one of your friends. It's a Kaplan and Norton book called The Execution Premium, right? And this book was written to address the gap of like, hey, like we're coming up with strategies all day and we have great operation people executing. These two things aren't getting connected.
Yes.
We're not actually setting aside enough resources, time, talent to actually make sure the execution is or the strategy is executed. That's what this whole book was about. It was fantastic, but it's like what you just told me unlocked in my mind what revenue enablement is. It's the execution of the strategy because it needs its own resources, because you can't like if you're changing the wheels on the bus while it's running, which is like the common business metaphor, right? Or fixing the plane while it's flying, pick your metaphor. Yeah. You can't take off the wings while you're flying. You can't take off the wheels because you can't like expect the wheels to change themselves. Somebody else has to do it. Somebody else has to make those changes and make sure they're seen through, because you don't want the salespeople to get off the phone.
Yeah.
Right? You can't afford to take them off for too long. So that's why you need a department dedicated to making sure your new initiatives to improve what they're already doing is set aside. Budget, people, tools, in order to make sure it's gone. Now it's like crystal clear in my mind of what revenue enablement is.
Well, what I love about you pulling that book down is one of my favorite books, which came out quite a while ago, addressed a really serious problem. And I'm not sure people did much with it, but I think the revenue enablement people could benefit from, it's called Aligning Strategy and Sales. And I believe it was Frank Cespedes, who's a Harvard lecturer, I think. I know he published it on HBR Publishing for sure. But Aligning Strategy and Sales. And he talked about that lack of connection. I'm, going to change his words a little bit. How do you execute strategy one deal at a time? Not all aspects of strategy can be executed at the sales level, right? If you're trying to lower your cost structure, but there's an awful lot of high level strategy that should be connected to one deal at a time. And I do believe that's the fundamental role of revenue enablement. And Frank's book, Aligning Strategy and Sales, maybe it's the right time to drop that into the revenue enablement world, because I think he wrote it too early.
So there you go. That is the status of sales enablement. Is it's dying. Revenue enablement is being born in its place, and it's much more clear and much more helpful.
Do you have ta-da music? Do you have ta-da music, Dan? Like ta-da?
Ta-da.
Because
I only got the drum.
All right.
But that doesn't fit. But we're going to put it in there anyway.
All right.
I need more sound effects on my soundboard here because that would make this show more fun. So stay tuned. There might be more sound effects coming in the near future. But thank you for listening to Close Mode. Hopefully this episode has been helpful to you in helping you unlock what sales enablement could be or what revenue enablement now is.
Thanks, Dan. Always fun.